Hi everyone, welcome back to the Deep Psychology Podcast. This is the first episode in my series on integral spirituality, which will be coming to you every Sunday in October. And this carries on from my series on the levels of spirituality from September. Welcome to the Deep Psychology Podcast. I'm your host, Ross Edwards, author, coach, and podcaster. We cover deep insights into your psychology, helping you grow in psyche and spirit. Make sure to subscribe to Deep Psychology on Spotify or Apple to stay up to date. You can also visit the website deep-psychology.com, visited by tens of thousands of people every month for lots of free resources. If you want to go deeper with this work, you might like to do coaching with me, head to the website for more details. It's time for today's episode. So as I was saying, in October, we're going to be looking in depth at the stage of development, the stage of spiritual development called integral spirituality. And this, again, follows on from my series last month on the levels of spirituality, where we covered traditional, modern, and postmodern spirituality. I would really recommend you go back and listen to that series after this episode so that you understand those prior three stages, and this will help you understand what integral spirituality is all about. So in today's episode, what we're going to do is look at just an introduction to integral spirituality to give you sort of the big picture about what this stage is doing, where it's at in terms of its presence in the world, and just, a broad overview of it. So, the essential details of integral spirituality are that this stage is not very visible in the culture at the moment. And this is what makes it very interesting. As we spoke about last week, postmodern spirituality is pretty prevalent, especially in certain social groups, socioeconomic groups. It's pretty prevalent. It's been around for really 60, 70 years now. Integral spirituality, it's hard to even give you examples of it because it's quite rare, and it's sort of in seedling form a little bit. It's not really grown into a full-blown tree yet, as it were. It's coming around, and really what I think is happening more than anything else at the moment is that there's a lot of individuals, there's maybe 5 to 10% of individuals in the West who are reaching into the integral worldview as a stage of development. But in terms of groups, in terms of, big groups of people coming together who are operating from that worldview, there's really not many, okay? What we can say, though, is that it emerges after postmodernism, after progressivism. In your development, once you've gone through progressive spirituality for a while, what will happen is, if you're going to develop further, you're going to develop into integral spirituality. So we can say that it's the next stage after progressive spirituality. Integral spirituality is evolutionary spirituality. So I might use the terms in this series this month. I might use those interchangeably because they are the same thing. If a spirituality is to be integral, it must be evolutionary, because behind integral spirituality is the integral worldview, which is an evolutionary worldview. Integral spirituality is based on the integral worldview in that the integral worldview is sort of baked into it, and it appears in conjunction with that worldview. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to have an integral spiritual life if you do not have an integral worldview, okay? One of the fundamental features of this worldview is that over the long run, everything is evolving, okay? And again, we'll get to this, but it's not just biological evolution, it's not just genetically driven evolution, it's everything is evolving with time. And you'll see how this comes up in the spiritual side of it. So integral spirituality, we can define it as our relationship to the divinity that is behind evolution. So we're aware of evolution thanks to the integral worldview, but of course, spirituality means a relationship to the fundamental nature of everything. And so the two combine in integral spirituality to be a relationship to the divinity that is behind evolution. So we actually see that, we begin to perceive that what is behind evolution fundamentally is the divine. It is the nature of everything that is behind evolution, okay? And we see this divinity to be loving, creative, intelligent, and willful. I like to think that someone at this level of spirituality looks at the world and themselves and other people as the evolving tapestry of God, the evolving manifestation of God. And I'm going to quote Steve McIntosh, who is my favourite philosopher on this subject here. He says, quote, "Our evolving universe provides the gift of experience through which free will creatures may participate in the gradual perfection of the finite cosmos." So this is how it all relates. This is how integral spirituality all comes together. We view the universe as evolving. We understand that ultimately it is a divinely driven process, and we understand that our job as human beings in this world is to evolve the world as an expression of the divine. We also realize that our own life is lit up by the divine movement of evolution. So it's not just a third person relationship. It's not just like we look out on the world and see it in the world. And it's not even just that we see it in other people, or that we experience it as a second person relationship, like an I-thou relationship with God, with loving creation, with loving evolution. It's actually, we see it in ourselves, we see it in our lives, that we ourselves are evolving, and that we are connected to divinity. We're also aware that we can consciously encourage and engage development. Like Steve McIntosh said, we can participate in the gradual perfection of the finite cosmos. We realize that we're not just individuals, and we're not just part of a collective. It's both at the same time, and we have the collective influences us, and we as individuals influence the collective. So we realize that we can consciously engage with it and be participants in the evolution of it. And another sort of more practical component of integral spirituality, really down to earth, is that we undertake transformative spiritual practices to deepen our relationship with the divine and our own personal development, because we realize, there's a deeper trust in evolution, in growth. We realize that that we have growing to do, that we need to identify more deeply with the divine, and that becomes our focus. And you'll see in a minute how that differs from, say, the postmodern focus. So that's sort of the key features, okay? And we're going to talk in a lot of detail this month about all of these, right? But what I'd like to do now is look at how integral spirituality differs from prior forms of spirituality, because you can kind of sense that there are some similarities. Integral spirituality, we connect with a divine being. It's almost a monotheistic view, yet it's got evolution baked in, which in ordinary traditional religion, that does not happen. That's more of a modern advance. It's more of a secular spiritual look at it. And in the postmodern, it's got a postmodern feel to it, in that it's very open, it's very sort of all-inclusive, it's all-encompassing. And yet it also feels like it isn't limited to either of these forms. So let's look closely at each of them and how integral spirituality differs. Traditional spirituality. So this form of spirituality, traditional religion, traditional spirituality often sees God as a moral force, as an arbiter, whereas integral spirituality sees it as a wise, loving creator. Okay? Also, traditional religious systems often see God to be separate from the manifest world, sort of strictly separate from it. Whereas in integral spirituality, God is panentheistic, which means that God is both transcendent, it is separate in some way, but it's also immanent, it is absolutely present in everything. Modern spirituality doesn't admit the possibility of a divine force. It just sees the universe in a materialistic way most of the time. It sees evolution as a purely physical, mechanical process driven by biological and genetic imperatives, whereas integral spirituality actually sees it as a divine creative movement. So that is very different. And also, at the integral worldview, we realize that we cannot reduce evolution to biological and genetic imperatives, and that it takes evolution is happening on all levels, not just the biological level. It's happening on individual psychological level, it's happening on collective level, it's happening morally, it's happening spiritually. It's happening in really all forms of human expression. So it's got a bit of the modern spiritual view in it, but it's quite different at the same time. Postmodern spirituality often lacks a clear, well-defined concept of the divinity. Postmodern spirituality it's not that it isn't limited to certain forms, and it's not that as a postmodern person you can't limit your spiritual life to certain forms of spirituality. That's not what I'm saying. But often in postmodern spirituality, we dabble with so many traditions, and our point of view is so open that what we're doing is we have a container that can contain many different forms, but it means that we often hold many sort of contradictory views about what the divine actually is, which maybe isn't it's maybe not a spiritual blind spot, perhaps. It's maybe just an expression of the fact that the divine is it's sort of ungraspable in a certain way, and so all perspectives are somewhat valid. However, what I think happens at integral spirituality is we're more sort of daring in our approach. We're willing to say it's this and not that. It's this religious or spiritual system expresses it and encapsulates it better than this other one, for example. Whereas at postmodern, we're in the buffet, as I said last week. We're having a buffet of spirituality, and we're just not very clear on what the divine is. So that's one thing. Also, postmodern spirituality tends to associate spirituality with group experiences, while I think integral spirituality, we associate it more with personal evolution and transformation, and how we then bring that into the world. So that is very different. And in my experience with postmodern groups, it's just that. It's all about the group experience. It's all about nicey, sort of touchy-feely, warmth, coming together, doing spiritual practice, yes, but often without the razor-sharp cutting edge of true spiritual work. And I feel like at integral spirituality, you get that back because you realize what it's really all about. And you're willing to say what it's all about, and you're willing to go against the grain a little bit with that. So that's just some of the differences it has with traditional modern and postmodern spirituality, and this helps you understand what integral spirituality looks like in yourself and in others. And what I'll also say is that it fundamentally differs from all three of them in that Integral spirituality is really the first stage of spiritual development, where we realize that all of the other stages are legitimate and important and that they play a role, okay? Whereas the previous three stages despise one another. You know, you ask a fundamentalist religious person about science, about secular forms of truth, and they will call you a heathen if you believe in it. You ask a secular spiritual person about postmodern spirituality, about Eastern practices, about meditation, about yoga, and about mantras, and all of this stuff, and they'll think you're crazy, a hippie, hippy dippy, and just sort of in the clouds. And if you ask postmodern about the previous two, they'll also have their own reasons for hating them, I can assure you. So integral spirituality, because it's based on the integral worldview, it implicitly understands that these are important, and it no longer fights against them necessarily. It's not that if you're integral, you have to sort of pretend to agree with the other systems if you don't. But it's that there's an implicit understanding, right? These are important. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I can see that I went through them, and I can see that others are going through them, and I can see that they're just steps towards ever deeper spiritual growth, okay? So in that sense, it's very different as well. So just to leave you with something very practical to take away, just 3 points to know if you are here in your spiritual development, or at least a good chunk of your psyche is here. And I can't be overly sure about this, but these are some, just, a guideline, a rule of thumb to follow. So first of all, you neither subscribe to traditional, modern, or postmodern spirituality, but you're also not overly triggered by them. 2, you see evolution in yourself and others along with its divine origin. 3, you are a serious spiritual practitioner, not lost in false spirituality, which, in my humble opinion, a lot of postmodern spiritual practitioners are. They are lost in false spirituality. In integral spirituality, I'm not saying there's no blind spots, but you're less likely to get involved in that. Okay, everyone, so that was an introduction to integral spirituality. There is much more to come in the next 3 episodes this month. These are released on Sundays, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. Central European time. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to come back every Sunday. And of course, I've also got my episodes on Wednesday at the same time that I just mentioned there. Those are an assortment of videos and just talking about psychological themes. So make sure to subscribe to the podcast and do come back for the rest of this series on integral spirituality. We've got so much to talk about. Thank you very much. Take care, and I'll see you very soon for more. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please leave a review and make sure to subscribe on Apple or Spotify. If you'd like to go deeper with this work, head to deep-psychology.com to do coaching with me. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you soon.